All right, so here we are, round 3 of Star Wars The Bad Batch. Disney Star Wars The Bad Batch. So, Season 3. We're picking back up from Season 2. Obviously, Tech has now died. That's kind of the only thing I remember from the end of Season 2. Before going into this and kind of realizing, what is actually going on again. It's really the only thing that really I remembered. And now, after watching these episodes, I'm like, okay, this is kind of where we're at. Crosshair is in prison with Omega now. They got Omega, and they're doing a bunch of cloning stuff. So, Star Wars isn't just such a weird place. And I'm not going into this season of The Bad Batch like I went into even Season 2, where I was optimistic in some potential. I don't have much optimism for Star Wars in general. So curious to see how they end this story, though, this show with these characters. Maybe not in general, like the overarching story they're trying to put into this show right now with the cloning and stuff. But I guess I'm curious to see how the Bad Batch's story ends, and see what they do. But it's not gripping my interest like it once was. It just isn't. And 2 of the episodes this week, they launched 3 right away, and it just didn't. It felt the same. It just didn't interest me. It wasn't exciting. So episode 1 is literally just Omega wandering back and forth each and every day, helping out with the cloning, facility that they got going on the Tantus place. And she's just there as prisoner, and she's helping out. That's about it. And they're keeping her blood from being tested, because her blood being tested is going to be some super important thing later. And that's really it. That's the first episode. It's just she's stuck in Tantus and Crosshair's there too. And that's it. Episode 2 of Season 3 is straight up pointless to talk about. Hunter and Wrecker are basically the only 2 really left on the ship right now. They run into a bunch of kid clones that are now out on their own. And they get away from the monsters in the forest, because there's always a monster for them to fight. So that's episode 2. Major filler. Bad Batch loves those. I would say even worse than Rebels ever had. Bad Batch loves those filler episodes. They always have, and they're so formulaic too, because it's always just some big creature or monster in a forest, or in a ship somewhere or something. It's some creature that they have to fight against. It's not even the Empire. Oh my gosh, it's just so boring to watch. It's getting old. It gets old. So now I'm not going to remember that in about an hour or 2 after this. Episode 3 is the one, I guess, the big one of this 3-episode launch is the episode with Palpatine. So we basically pick back up with Omega with doing her same stuff. Nalase is trying to keep Omega's blood from being, scanned, because apparently her blood is super important. So Palpatine has arrived to the Tantus location, and Hemlock, I think that's his name, the guy running the facility, he greets Palpatine, and Palpatine arrives to his facility here with all these cloning things. So this whole cloning thing is it just seems very sequel-like, It's quite clear that he's trying to extend, maybe his life, or clone himself, or just do something with cloning. It's similar to basically how Mandalorian was doing their weird cloning things too. And they continuously talk about the M count, and they're taking blood from clones. I don't necessarily know how it's all sticking together, but he's obviously trying to figure something out in how to clone him or himself, and just create these creatures, and maybe, I don't know. It's all screaming sequel trilogy to me. And they do end up opening one of these vats with something inside, some creature inside, and they could be looking at Snoke, like a first variation of Snoke from the sequels at this point. I'm thinking it's a very high possibility of that, because I don't see where this story necessarily fits in all that much, except for tying into the sequels and Palpatine suddenly needing to transfer his essence to a clone or something. There's a bunch of Palpatine clones he tried, his son was a clone who ended up being Rey's father. I'm just picking little pieces that I remember. Maybe I'm forgetting something. I try not to remember the sequels. but there's this weird cloning thing with Palpatine and Snoke, and I just feel like it's all just building back up to that. And there's this thing about Palpatine going on, like this is a very, very highly secretive and very important project that we are working on, and it needs to be protected. So, the Palpatine thing, the sequel thing, look, it's all leading to the sequels, and I've known that for a while. I'm not, oblivious to that. I know it's going to the sequels, and I've never denied and thought that we could just ignore them. Well, I guess I did think we could ignore them, but I knew it's all leading to it. But at this rate, it's leading to it. They're doing their tie-ins. They're doing their tie-ins with Mandalorian. They're doing their tie-ins with Bad Batch. They're going to do their tie-ins as much as possible. And part of me is like incredibly frustrated because, of course they would. They can't even possibly give us any Star Wars with characters that we maybe care about and like, even with Palpatine, without tying it back now to where the story goes with the sequels. But at the same time, it's like, what do you expect them to do? The sequels existed now, and Disney, as long as Disney has a hold of this franchise and this brand for however long, they're going to try and do everything they can to somehow make those movies make sense. That's what they're going to do. And it's never going to make sense for a lot of people. The movies are awful. And I don't really want to think about them. I don't think about those last 3 movies as part of Star Wars. They're just not. And I know they're part of the official canon with Disney, and that's just how this works. But they're going to tie to the sequels, and if you're willing to ignore that and still watch some of this stuff with Palpatine and the clones and stuff, some of it can be fun. But they're going to tie the sequels, and if you don't really want that, I think Star Wars at this point is just done for you. If you just can't accept it. And I'm at that point. Like, Star Wars is just so... It's just kind of walking around. It doesn't have a place. It doesn't have a purpose anymore. It's just... I watched Ahsoka. And Ahsoka was kind of my last thing. Is like, this is Dave Filoni. This is all he is. This is his story. This is his thing. And I didn't like it. It wasn't good. So, not only are they delivering mediocre mid stories here with Bad Batch... I will say, I like Bad Batch more than, like, Ahsoka. I think the animation looks good and stuff. I do enjoy the story a little more than Ahsoka, but like, I just can't help but feel the overall sense of doom and gloom where everything is now trying to tie into things that just never made sense, and that is the sequels. They're all trying to tie into them, and it is what it is. It just kind of disconnects me from the show. Like, I can watch it, I can enjoy little bits of it, but I'm not connected to it really in any way like I maybe possibly could have, because I know I don't really care that much about it anymore. It's just not the Star Wars that we could be getting, because now we have to all try and make sense of these movies that were never planned out to begin with, and now everything going forward is going to just be a disaster. It's all going to be clunky because they all have to try and panic and scram and just try to get everything connected and interlocked, when in reality it just seems to make everything more and more and more confusing and annoying. So this is basically that now in between period where they're trying to link our old stuff that we loved with Clone Wars and Palpatine and the Empire, and they're trying to link it all together now with the sequel trilogy, which felt so disconnected when they released. Now they're trying to create their interconnection with everything, and I think we're going to see a lot more of sequel connections going into the season, because it's only the 3rd episode here with Palpatine. I think we're going to see him quite a few more times. I think we're gonna learn some big things here that are going to be basically straight on directed to the sequels. Like, I think it's all leading right to it. With this show, Mandalorian was doing it. Mandalorian season 3 was bad. Ahsoka I didn't enjoy. This, it's just, it is what it is. That's my feelings. So, the Bad Batch season 3, Look, I don't know what the hell's going to happen in this final season of The Bad Batch. I think I'll cover it. But my feelings toward this show and the franchise overall have changed a lot in the past year or two now. I was holding on hope for a little while there, but I am at a certain point where I'm kind of over it. So I'm covering it because I know some people, maybe just a few people out there, may want to hear what I have to say about it. If not, that's fine. If you don't like what I have to say, it's what it is. That's what I feel. That's my feelings on it. And we'll see what happens next week for The Bad Batch. We'll probably get like 5 or 6 more filler episodes that make no sense and mean nothing. And then we'll get something, every now and then that matters to some extent. That's generally how these seasons go. So we'll see what happens next week, episode 4. Palpatine's moving on to his cloning stuff. And we'll see how it goes.